Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. I have a quick announcement. At GBS, we're about to roll out something very, very cool. We're proud of, been working on a long time, and that's a new membership community. You're going to see that January 1st. Keep an eye out because we are going to really give you access to some incredible features, including access to some of the guests I have here on my podcast, friends of mine that you could ask project questions to. You can ask those thought leadership questions. But also, if you're preparing for an exam, we've got even more insurances that you'll pass that next exam. We've got even more cliff notes to give to you if you're part of our membership community, and so much more. So stay tuned. Be on the lookout for some upcoming announcements. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Today's a special guest because he's been at the U.S. Green Building Council for a long time. Brendan and I have run into each other over the years, but Brendan Owen's Chief of Engineering now. We're going to get into that title with the USGBC. Brendan, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I always like to go back. Hey, man, where'd you grow up? And I see you went to Purdue University. So, did you grow up in that part of the country or no? But tell us a little more of your origin story.
No, I was actually born in Alabama. My dad was in the military. He was in the Coast Guard. So we bounced around from mostly Great Lakes and Gulf Coast states throughout my childhood, and then ended up at Purdue largely because of the strength of the engineering program. And other than that, pretty little affiliation to the place before I ended up there.
Oh, okay. So being born in Alabama, I'm here in Atlanta, Brendan. I'm an ACC fan. I went to Georgia Tech, but are you a Auburn or are you a University of Alabama fan?
I'm a Purdue fan. I'm not gonna ruin any political chances I have in Alabama by picking a side in that one.
I love it. So Purdue, civil engineering background. Tell us about your time there. And when you were in college, were there any sustainability classes? When did you really think, man, I want to make a career out of sustainability?
Well, I don't know if it was ever a conscious choice. Part of my dad's job in the Coast Guard was environmental protection under sort of a marine safety heading. And a lot of times he'd end up doing response activities to oil spills or any other type of disaster at sea. And, it was easy to sort of understand the environmental ramifications of that type of activity and then the responses that were necessary. I think if there's one moment, Exxon Valdez was the thing that sort of sparked my interest in the idea of, being a part of the solutions that could be created from an environmental perspective. But I wanted to engage in a problem solving way. So engineering was more of a means to an end from my perspective, because it sort of gave you the technical chops or the foundation. I guess you didn't really graduate from university knowing anything practical, but you have the ability to sort of engage in problem solving and design solutions, and that was really what, from my perspective, the thing that I wanted to be able to bring to what in my head at the time was the environmental movement. And that's the road that I sort of walked to get to Purdue, to get to an engineering degree. And then coming out of university, I started working for a small environmental consultancy working on energy issues. And our client was the U.S. Army.
Wow. Yeah, we always want to start with energy efficiency first, and then we'll get into, the rest of this kind of green building program and LEED and other things. But energy first, it looks like you've done that for maybe about 5 years. And then you got tapped by the USGBC and you've been there since. So can you tell us some more about that story? How did you end up in DC and really be that early team member and grow LEED like you've done?
Well, DC was home right before college, so it's been home as long as I've ever lived in one place. So it's home at this point. Alexandria, Virginia, more specifically than DC. But the job that I had was working for the Army. We ran the energy program for an installation just south of Alexandria in Lorton, Virginia. And that work exposed me to a whole bunch of things. We did an energy savings performance contract on the installation that I worked at, which was a fantastic sort of primer in, looking at deep energy retrofits in buildings. But, the thing that I think led me to USGBC was working with, there was a group in DC at that time called Green Home, and it was basically Habitat for Humanity with, building green buildings. So I volunteered for them and got exposed and looped into and onto a listserv that was circulating, just jobs in the general environmental community. And that's how I discovered that USGBC was hiring. I had been in the energy program work that I had done for the environmental consultant that I was working on. One of the things that I was tasked with doing was being part of a design team that was building a new Army Corps of Engineers building using the LEED rating system, or what was at that point the beta version of the rating system, and a program that the Corps had put together based on LEED called Spirit. So it was back 1999, 2000. And then I ended up interviewing for the job through this connection I had with Green Home, and that was 2001, and started working in 2002. And
the rest is history.
That was that.
No.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's history, but it's certainly been a good ride.
No, you're doing great, man. And I know you've had a lot of different roles at the USGBC, and so I want to come back to that. But through your career, mentors, have you had anyone you could name that's really helped you during your career? Anyone had some influence on you that stands out?
I think the person who had the most profound effect on the trajectory of my career at USGBC. There's just so many people who have been, instrumental in sort of shaping it. But
sure.
if there's one person, it'd be Malcolm Lewis. I don't know if that's a name that rings any bells for anybody out there, but Malcolm was the chair of the technical and scientific committee when I started at USGBC, and they were the place that we stuck all of the issues that were too hard to deal with. So we had this really group of brilliant people that would get together and bang around on the pieces of technical aspects of either rating system development or general USGBC policy that were impossible to solve. So, he was in my opinion, he was the right person to lead that group, and, also worked with the lead steering committee, and just was a brilliant thinker, sort of introduced the idea of a pragmatic approach to systems engineering that I think has been something that I've tried to carry throughout the time that I've been involved in the technical development of any of the rating systems that USGBC and GBCI are partnered on.
Man, that's really cool. So what are some of your proudest achievements, Brendan, so far?
I don't know that any achievement that I've been, there's not one thing that I've been personally responsible for outside a broader team. I was really proud of the work that USGBC did to help bring a much more understandable and transparent and deliberative process to how we allocate points to credits in the rating system. The previous versions, or the versions of the rating system that I worked on when I first started here, were all sort of implicitly weighted. They tagged a certain number of points to a credit, and there wasn't really a deep scientific basis for how, beyond just the consensus of the groups that were responsible for doing the work, which has a tremendous amount of value, don't get me wrong. But, as we got more and more serious about the market implications of decisions that we were making, as we got more and more serious about the scientific outcomes and the technical outcomes of projects that were implementing the rating system, we had an opportunity to be much more deliberate, scientific, and engaged with how we, just sort of signal to the market what we care about in the rating system. So the establishment of the process that we use to do that currently was started back in about 2004, 2005. And over the successive iterations of the release of the 2009 rating system and the release of the of the V4 rating system, we have been refining that process. And I think that, in terms of the way that it has enabled us to take the prioritization exercise that we have been doing for LEED now for more than a decade, and bring it to other rating systems that USGBC and GBCI have partnered on, it's really, had a ripple effect far beyond what I thought it would have when we were putting it all together.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the proudest achievements. It's always a good thing to shout out to the team. And you guys have grown a rating system that you have to raise the bar every 4 or 5 years or so. So I know we've got LEED version 4 and LEED version 4.1 rolling out, this fall, but for EB and stuff that's out here in the spring. So I know you're busy. But let's talk a little bit about what else is keeping you busy today. Your current title, per your LinkedIn, is Chief of Engineering, but I know you've really been on the technical side, been a vice president there. But, Brendan, give us a peek in. What else are you working on today? Anything you can kind of let us know about?
We've been spending a lot of time on carbon in all of its forms. So looking at the embodied carbon of materials, we're looking at the embodied carbon of water, we're looking at the embodied carbon of energy, obviously, and transportation and all the rest of it, and trying to make sure that we are positioning the rating system to provide incentive for and reward project teams that are taking steps to reduce the carbon footprint of the projects that are being rated using any of our rating systems, Peer or LEED or True or Sites or any of the other ones that we're engaged around. So that's a interesting systems engineering project and problem, understanding that the metric that we care about is something that is so cross-cutting and ubiquitous in terms of how you look at issues in terms of building siting, in terms of what you're going to make the building out of, in terms of how the building is going to be oriented on the site as it affects the energy use of the building. All of those things can be looked at through the lens of sort of the defining lens of the carbon decisions that you're making, and we're trying to ensure that the decisions that we're rewarding in LEED are encouraging project teams to minimize that. Okay. The other thing I've been spending a lot of time on is building to grid interactions, understanding that energy as a system needs to be optimized not at any particular scale, but at a systems level. Right. So we want project teams to think about the implications of when they're using energy, how they're using energy, what the peak load and curves that their buildings produce, how that impacts the generation, transmission, and distribution side of the energy system, and understand that they need to be partners rather than just passive occupants on the grid, and trying to create tools and incentives and education content that allows project teams to go through and say, if I'm in California and I am looking at the next dollar I want to spend from a decarbonization perspective, maybe it's not a solar panel on this building, maybe it's some batteries.
Right.
And looking at the building to grid integration and interaction as an active place where buildings can be much, much better neighbors and much, much better participants on helping the supply side of the energy industry decarbonize.
Now, LEED is obviously weighted based on carbon emission reduction. If you ever want to go for LEED Gold or LEED Platinum, you've got to get cars off the road. You've got to save energy. But it's fascinating what you're telling me you and your team are researching. Is this going to be a LEED version 5, a LEED version 6? I mean, how far down the road do you think this may, more of what you're talking about, may show up in LEED, or is it maybe a separate rating system? I don't know what you can give us a peek into.
Well, the toe in the water on the building grid integration and interaction topic is already there. We've had a demand response credit in version 4 since we put it out, right? And that's the first sort of step into helping project teams understand that grid congestion is something that buildings can play a role in alleviating, and it has if they can shift their peak 2 hours either direction, that has a tremendous benefit to the people who operate the distribution grid that they're connected to, and something that it's of value to the utility industry. So people will get paid for behaving better than they maybe were. But, what we're looking at for version 4.1 is a much more, is a broader conversation that the demand response credit in the version 4 rating system sets us up to be able to engage around. So we're looking at distributed energy resources much more broadly than just demand response. So we're looking at batteries, we're looking at PV generation, we're looking at strategies to shift your load or shift your peak, whether it's thermal energy storage or electrical energy storage, automated demand response. All of these technologies that allow project teams to manipulate their load shape are things that we are trying to figure out how in 4.1 we give project teams credit for taking actions and implementing strategies that enable them to be able to be better citizens on the grid.
Yeah. No, demand response is very important. I think, in some parts of the United States, power is still pretty cheap and maybe there's not as much of a DR need, but, New York and some other major markets, they've already set a good example of we've got to do this and other regions are going to have to do it soon, but don't wait. And you guys have set up that optional LEED credit with a few ways that even buildings without demand response markets still can participate and be ahead of this. So good job there. You mentioned carbon. Is there anything else around the corner we should be reading up on? Brennan, what do you think's kind of around the corner with this green building movement?
Around the corner, I don't know. I mean, crystal ball is not really my thing. I think the trends that we're seeing in terms of the seriousness around the embedded carbon of materials is picking up steam at the right time. If we really want to deal with the challenge that we have as a society, global society, then every oar's got to be in the water. So from that standpoint, looking at the way that we manufacture things, looking at the way that carbon can be a deciding factor in terms of product selection is critical. And you're looking at the partnerships that we're engaged in and the conversations that we're a part of to ensure that understanding whether it's through disclosure mechanisms like an environmental product declaration, or whether it's through, tools that enable project teams to do whole building life cycle assessment. The importance that we've placed on, rewarding projects for taking actions that are in line with decarbonization of the built environment are throughout. And I think that all of the transportation work that we've ever done, all the, the siting and energy pieces that we've done, it's all been driven by an understanding that, there's co-benefits to systems thinking from the perspective of how we can drive down the carbon footprint of the buildings.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Thanks for sharing and kind of validating that. So let's just go some rapid fire here. What do you think is your specialty or gift? Sometimes a tough question, but what do you think you're best at?
There was a time when I would probably say energy, but I feel like the thing that the job that I've had at USGBC over the years has forced me to spend a lot of time thinking about lots of stuff. And I think that one of the things that I try to bring to the table is a systems approach to understand that, this thing that we're doing is a giant game of whack-a-mole, and it's not okay to, optimize one piece of it at the expense of another piece of it. So from that standpoint, I would say that the systems thinking that we've been able to do is, or we've been required to do, has really sort of enabled me to be a much more useful asset to the green building industry.
Yeah. No, good. Busy guy. What routines or rituals do you have that keep you on point, help you be successful?
I would say bike commuting. That's
nice.
Kind of, I think it's there's a lot to be said for, finding ways where you can link in, personal sustainability and health to, getting to and from work. So I think that the more people who are doing that, the better.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, man. Really. Are you in Alexandria now, and then you commute over the water heading into M Street there, L Street, or how long is your bike
L
ride?
Street.
Yeah,
it's 8 miles, depending on which way I go.
Cool, love it, man.
Yeah, we got a shower here and bike racks, just like the LEED credit says we have to. So,
and you're using them. I love it.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about A bucket list. I'm a fan of a bucket list. Brendan, what are one or two things maybe on your bucket list? Maybe adventure, maybe travel, something personal, or something even business related.
I think I'd like to ride, staying on the bike lane. I think I'd like to ride Paris-Roubaix, which is it's a spring classic route from starts in Paris, ends in Roubaix in France.
Wow.
I think I'd like to do that with my kids one day.
That's cool. That sounds like a great bucket list item, man. Yeah, I've got 3 boys. They're 10, 7, and 5. So we got a house full. You got a couple kids?
Yeah, we've got a boy and a girl.
Awesome.
9 and 7.
Congrats. You'll have to listen to Mahesh's episode. I had him on the podcast, and I asked him about his bucket list. I'll leave you with that teaser, okay?
Cool, yeah. I don't think I listened to it. I didn't get all the way.
Okay.
I didn't get all the way to the bucket list question, though.
Cool. Fair enough, man. Fair enough. Well, hey, just
that in the front, yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a really good time. And I asked him what he's best at, too. And for someone like you who's right there alongside him, I think it's good for you guys to have these conversations. That's what I'm encouraging all my podcast guests is, hey, make sure your team listens to this, too, because might give them a peek into, a little more of your origin story and then a little more of what motivates you. So I'm loving it. Just a couple more questions. This is a lot of fun. Books. I don't know if you listen to books or read books, like a hard copy, but, are there 1 or 2 books you'd recommend?
I am at the very end of a book called The Wizard and the Prophet.
Okay.
I'll
write that down.
It's by Charles C. Mann.
Okay.
It's about sort of a juxtaposition of techno-optimist and maybe sort of more traditional conservationist thinking, and sort of poses the question of, is either extreme correct in the world that we live in right now? And I think it's a fascinating sort of look into the way that the Green Revolution, which is the sort of the more plant, agriculture revolution that came along in response to the projections about overpopulation and famine and end of days stuff that were being talked about by people in the 20s and the 30s, and then technology comes along and solves the food problem by hybridization of different types of wheat and rice, and the idea that you can't live in a world that puts all its eggs in one basket. You can't assume that technology is coming along to solve every problem, but you also can't assume that it's not going to play an integral role. So it's to me, it's a really interesting read to sort of understand that, the path forward is a blend of both, faith in technology, but also faith in more conservation-minded thinking. So it's really good.
I pulled it up right here. We're going to link to it in the podcast show notes, and I haven't read or listened to it. I'm going to check it out, man. It sounds fun. Those 2 potential paths, and you're right. Don't put all those eggs in one basket. It's good stuff. Yeah, Brendan, you've been in the green building movement for a long time. You've actually been shaping it by your work at the USGBC. Say someone's just now jumping into this green building movement. Any words of encouragement, anything you'd suggest to them as they're making a go at it in this green building movement?
Tell all of us people who have been doing it for the last 15 years to get out of the way. I feel like there's the idea that and it still happens. You still run into the person who's been in the buildings industry for the last 25 years and doesn't need any of your green crap or any of your new way of thinking about design or construction or operations or maintenance, and that every industry has that inertia, and the only way to push through it is by moving those people aside. And to the extent that even people in jobs that like I have are in the way, let us know and tell us when we're not helping.
Man, that's actually really good advice, and you're right. It's probably every industry, but an industry like ours, green buildings and wellness real estate and carbon and embodied carbon, man, it's we've got to innovate even faster than maybe some other industries. So really cool advice. I'm glad you're open and honest here on the podcast, Brennan. It was cool to get to know you a little more, and just thanks for the hard work. I think you're one of the longest tenured employees at the USGBC, and we just want to say thanks for everything you're doing, man. And thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. It was interesting. I didn't really know what to expect going in.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.